Right. Well,
Hello.
hey, everybody. So we have this picture here. Let me get this out of the way. All right, welcome everybody to Okcoin Live. I'm your host, Sammy McCullough. Today, I'm joined by three wonderful people. We have, well, we'll start with you, Natalie. Natalie Brunell. We have Jason, my boss, and then also Dennis Porter. And, we're here today to talk about something a little bit different than I think what most of us have been talking about, which is Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about politics today. And I think this is a really super important conversation because for some reason, this cycle that we've been having has really driven a lot more interest from lawmakers, from regulatory agencies, from just pretty much everybody who is starting to put more of, you could even call it a target on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And it affects us all. And whether you're just a person who buys cryptocurrencies or you just are using it to send money back and forth, it doesn't really matter. It's a topic that affects us all. So I wanted to bring you all here so that we could discuss this subject. So welcome everyone.
Thanks,
Sam.
Glad to be here.
I think it's I don't write this stuff, right? So we were putting together Jason and I were putting together prep work for the conversation, and literally you cannot write this stuff. Like this morning, I'm on Twitter, and all of a sudden this video from Hillary pops up that she just gave a I guess talk at one of these Bloomberg discussion forums, and I thought it would be relevant to play this video to kick off this live stream, and then just kind of go from there based on the comments she's saying, because it's not us that's pushing this stuff; it's coming from our government figures. And so, why don't we just begin? Let's hop into this video with Hillary.
Of artificial intelligence is going to threaten nation states, going to threaten multinational corporations, and then one more area that I hope nation states start paying greater attention to is the rise of cryptocurrency. Because what looks like a very interesting and somewhat exotic effort to literally mine new coins in order to trade with them has the potential for undermining currencies, for undermining the role of the dollar as the reserve currency, for destabilizing nations, perhaps starting with small ones, but going much larger.
There's so much to unpack there. I don't know where to even begin. I mean, Dennis and Natalie, what do you take away when watching someone like Hillary say these comments, and how does it make you feel hearing her say these things?
Well, for me personally, when I listen to Hillary Clinton speak on one of the more predominant issues of a time, it's more than likely that she's going to be wrong on that issue. She's historically been wrong on generational shifts and generational issues in the past. And typically she makes public statements like these and then quickly reverses them when she realizes just how unpopular they are. So I think that this is just the beginning phases of Hillary Clinton being orange-pilled when she realizes just how unpopular she is on this issue. She did the same thing with gay marriage in 2013. She realized how extremely unpopular it was to be against it and moved her position quite rapidly. And soon after had a rainbow flag for her campaign when it came down on her that this was not a popular issue. I think she's going to realize the same thing with Bitcoin. She's going to realize just how unpopular it is to be anti-Bitcoin, and she will be soon flipping her position.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dennis. I certainly just was I was very surprised to see her say this, because she's lumping everything into the cryptocurrency basket, which means she's done none of the homework, right? So that's what it showed me, is basically you have not done your homework on Bitcoin. You don't understand Bitcoin because you just said cryptocurrencies in general, you didn't even name Bitcoin, are going to undermine these nations. So you have no idea about this technology. I kind of poked fun at her today on Twitter. I said that, she's a certain boomer, couldn't get her emails straight. So she doesn't like Bitcoin. Big deal. Unfortunately, there are a lot of politicians that just haven't done their homework. And I think that's why there are ongoing efforts to make sure to educate the people in Washington that potentially could have some impact on regulation and taxation. I think it just highlights that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's sad to see someone with such a big name come out against cryptocurrency in general when she doesn't really understand the technology and the ways that it could help the people that she used to represent. So
I think we can agree with you completely, Natalie. I mean, it's clear she has done no homework besides reiterating the same talking points that others have already spewed. This FUD has been around, and she's just repeating it. So that's a bit disappointing. But I think it's perhaps an opportunity to educate, like you said. And the reality is this is probably the default defensive status quo conclusion that our politicians are going to jump to at first. Right. And she's just showing us that there's still a lot of work for us to do, for us as an industry as a whole, to educate and basically show all the good things that crypto can do.
Yeah, I think there was three things that she really touched on there. One, there was a slight jab towards El Salvador. It's small countries, implementing cryptocurrencies. Small jab towards El Salvador. I don't know really if it's warranted. So she talked about preserving the dollar as a global reserve currency, preventing the loss of faith in national currencies, and then also preventing the loss of the ability to implement policy through national currencies for things like social programs and other monetary policy. So those I've heard that repeated for a while, but is it warranted for her to have this line of thinking? Like, is there anything to those three ideas that she's put forward about keeping dollar strength and ensuring the power of the U.S. state? Is there anything there that she's actually speaking the truth about, or is it just not understanding what's happening with Bitcoin?
As far as Natalie, you'd happy to have you take the lead on this one if you'd like to go ahead. But as far as the dollar and Bitcoin is concerned, I tend to agree with Michael Saylor on this position. I think the dollar can very well survive alongside Bitcoin for a very long time to come. I don't think that it's a direct threat at this point. Bitcoin is more a store of value than it is a medium of exchange for most people. I think that we can see, going to El Salvador here, that it's very clear that the dollar and Bitcoin can survive alongside each other. And if anything, El Salvador has been an incredible test case for what this could look like for the United States moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dennis. I personally think that fiat currencies have destabilized nations. I think that they've led to all of this wealth inequality. And so I think it's kind of ironic that she's saying this about cryptocurrency when we really need something like Bitcoin to save us, to be the life raft that rescues us from all the manipulation that's been caused by the money printing and the artificially low interest rates. So, one thing that I agree with on Dennis is the US dollar doesn't have to disappear. We didn't have to be in this position that we're in, but unfortunately we're seeing the collapsing power of our money. We've been able to get away with all this money printing, I think, on a global level because we're the global reserve currency. And so people are opting out of a broken system for a very big reason, right? Because you can't put your wealth into cash and maintain its value. You have to basically become a stockbroker on the side. And thank God we have something like Bitcoin, which is just appreciated in time. It might be volatile in the short term. We might be seeing little dips like we are right now. But, at the end of the day, zoom out and it is appreciating in value due to its fixed supply and increasing demand. So I think we need something like Bitcoin. I wish we didn't. I wish we lived in that perfect world where our money was able to sit in the bank and be worth at least the same as it was last year. Right. But we don't live in that world. And unfortunately, the policies that people like the Clintons have had in our country for decades now have led us to this place where we need something like, Bitcoin with its fixed supply. I think it's really sad that they've created bubble after bubble. I mean, if we think about the 90s when Bill Clinton was in office, we had a dot-com bubble. And what did they do? They rushed in with quantitative easing. They reinflated the bubble and we had a housing bubble. And then that popped, and now all of a sudden we have a treasury bond bubble. It's like bubble after bubble after bubble. They're pouring money onto this they're spraying their money hose around, and all of it's pretty much kindling for this economic dumpster fire that they've created globally. So I just think that we need Bitcoin to basically save nation states.
Absolutely. And one last point there I think that can be made is that the dollar can actually use Bitcoin and the Lightning Network as a rail to expand all over the world. People are going to want the number one reserve asset, which is Bitcoin, they're also going to want the number one fiat in this time where we're switching to a world where people can have optionality with their money. So for those of the people that are out there that are worried about Bitcoin versus the dollar, I actually see a world very clearly ahead in the next 10, 20 years where the dollar could expand and potentially be more available to more people and give more people stability with their daily currency that they use to buy groceries and to pay for rent.
That's a good point, Dennis. And I think maybe you're seeing some early signs of that now, where we have these sort of parallel crypto economies too, where a lot of it's still in Bitcoin, but there's also a lot of activity in the sort of dollar equivalents around the world. But I did want to make add one point to what you said, Natalie, and I agree completely. Is a lot of this maybe the fear that these politicians have about the sort of decline of the global reserve status of the dollar may be warranted, and you're entirely right. A lot of that is as a result of their own doing, right? Another point that I'd like to add is that the sort of all this economic sanctions being enforced on individuals and countries using the dollars and using the sort of the banking system that the dollar is built on actually forces people to look for alternatives quite naturally. And you've seen countries like Russia and China do so explicitly, right? They want to have more international trade be denominated in non-dollars for precisely this reason. They don't want to be reliant. And Bitcoin is an alternative, like you said, an alternative system that countries or individuals can adopt per their own choosing. And so I think that's very powerful. But a lot of these issues are caused by fiat and governments themselves.
Yeah. So I'd like to get your guys' thoughts. There's been a lot of change in this cycle versus the last one. When I look back on 2017, it was mostly confusion on the part of the institutions and governments. Like what is this? Where did it come from? Let's try to get a thumb on this. I think they've had 4 years now since the last cycle to kind of process and put together more coherent thoughts on how it should be regulated, on what sort of laws are needed. And the thing that's most interesting to me is the broader coalition of politicians who have essentially started to become pro cryptocurrencies, pro Bitcoin, and are in the Senate, are in the U.S. House of Representatives, and are working towards bringing about, I guess, sound and good laws that will allow both individuals and companies to invest and operate. So what's gone into that change, and what have you been seeing?
Well, Dennis, you've done a lot of work in this space, so I'll let you kick this off, but I want to share something after you.
Yeah, there's a ton of work that's going on currently. There's a lot of motion occurring under the surface, so it's hard to really see what's going on above. But what happens is all of the efforts from those that are lobbying, you have Coin Center has done a great job of establishing themselves as that initial first organization that is going to go out there and lobby for the whole space. But we also now have multiple organizations and lobbying efforts underway, which have resulted in incredible changes in the perception from elected officials towards Bitcoin. We saw recently movements by Ted Cruz, Cynthia Lummis, and a few others. Representatives like Representative Warren Davidson have been making incredible strides to be able to protect Bitcoin in Congress. So all of this has come about, a lot of it has come about because of the hard work of incredible Bitcoiners out there who are directly lobbying these individuals. We have two major organizations that I'm very excited about supporting and being a part of the work that they do, and just educating those in the Bitcoin space about. And that is the Bitcoin Today Coalition, that was started by a great group of very hardcore, solid Bitcoiners who care deeply about protecting the Bitcoin in the United States. Ultimately, what happened with a lot of us when the crypto tax reporting amendment dropped is we realized that we could no longer play defense. There's an old saying out there that you might not care about politics, but it cares about you. And if you decide to take a defensive or a non-engaged approach to politics, eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're not adequately positioned to defend yourself. So many of us decided to change the way we perceive politics from, okay, we're Bitcoin, we're outside the government, we don't need them, to, okay, we very clearly need to ensure that we are actively engaging with elected officials in order to have these conversations so that they can be on our side, because this is what all the power brokers do. They don't sit and wait around for legislation to get written. They actively engage members of Congress to ensure that legislation is written in a way where it helps not only defend the industry, but helps to grow the industry. So we're not just looking for a complete hands-off approach from the government. Nobody is expecting the United States to say, let's ignore Bitcoin for the next 20 years. All we want is smart regulation, and we want active legislation that helps encourage the growth of the businesses here. Recently, with China exiting and kicking all of the miners out, which was an incredible gift to the United States, we have seen the benefits that have come from that. Now we are number one in mining throughout the world. For the first time ever, the United States is number one in Bitcoin mining, and that is an incredible opportunity to help protect the USA infrastructure far into the future. It's a national security issue at this point to not have any infrastructure. But what happened was, when the crypto tax reporting amendment came down, it was a direct attack on that infrastructure. They tried to relabel miners and node operators as brokers, which would require them to submit KYC, AML information. Perfectly happily submitting information that we as miners or node operators would receive, but we don't receive that information. There's no way for us to report on it via the third-party doctrine, which means that they're essentially putting a gun to the head of the crypto industry and saying, well, we might not enforce this because we know you technically can't follow this law, but it gave them the opportunity to pick winners and losers. So I'm very excited about the efforts that are underway with Bitcoin Today Coalition and also Bitcoin Magazine, who's been working very actively in this space to ensure that we protect the infrastructure, the businesses, and the innovation that's occurring in the United States.
Yeah, that's all awesome. I'm super excited about our efforts to make sure that Bitcoin is bipartisan. That's like the really big thing. And we obviously see a movement with some politicians that are already favorable and are knowledgeable about this technology. I'm at a speaking event in St. Louis, and I have this presentation that I give, about Bitcoin and how to invest. And I show a slide where Cynthia Lummis talks about her "Thank God for Bitcoin" speech. But it's a fascinating speech if you listen to the whole thing, because it's really, she calls it an indictment on both parties throughout the years of raising the debt ceiling and spending far too much and getting us into this situation where we need, again, non-fiat currencies to sort of save us. And it's a really powerful speech. And so I see it moving in the right direction in terms of there are politicians and there are people behind the scenes of political offices trying to get us in the direction of making sure that the education is there. And I think it once again highlights we have so much work to do and to go, because we live in a very bipartisan world where one side could potentially hijack the message, and that would be very bad for Bitcoin and for everyone in general, because we're still so early. We are not at the point of mass adoption. Very few people have Bitcoin. And so the last thing that we want is the kind of narrative that Hillary Clinton's putting out there that, hey, this threatens the US dollar. So those of you who have all your 401ks and savings and, all of your portfolios in dollars, you're being attacked somehow by this community, when in fact it's the opposite. We're trying to attack things like poverty and inequality and manipulation. And so I just think that work of education is so important in the political space.
Yeah,
Hey,
Dennis,
sorry.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions actually, Dennis and Natalie. One is, I think it's still, it's so exciting to see all these awesome efforts starting to take root. I think, you see Masari and Ryan Selkis also being very vocal about being politically active. One, curious, both of you, what your thoughts are on sort of that approach. And two is, tell us more about this bipartisan Bitcoin. I think we've been hearing it around Twitter, and I think you guys have done some Twitter spaces, I believe. And it's really cool to see this recent, I guess, amendment to that bill that was proposed by a bipartisan group of representatives. I think that was super awesome. So yeah, curious what are your thoughts around holistically all these efforts, other efforts too, besides the two you mentioned, Dennis?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we realize in this short window that we're currently in that we don't get too prideful or arrogant about the position that we're in to affect change, and that we make sure that we work across the aisle, not just from red versus blue, but we're also working with guys like Ryan or Coin Center. We are not in a position to say, oh, we're enemies. You guys are crypto, we're Bitcoin. I think it's really important that we all work together because we do have this potential common enemy, which is negative or destructive legislation that could come down from members of Congress. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it's a very important window that we ensure that we're all doing everything we can as single issue voters to push Bitcoin. And I know because we're protecting Bitcoin, we're also generally protecting the crypto industry as a whole. So I think it's important that we work together. Yeah, me and Natalie, we did the bipartisan Bitcoin room. It was so much fun planning that and putting it together. I was extremely impressed the moment I started talking to Natalie about the planning process and just how bright and intelligent she is on doing these sorts of things. She has the media background, so it helped us out a lot. But we had such a great time getting all the speakers together and planning that room and having that room. And we're currently in the process of putting on the next spaces right now. We're booking speakers. So we're going to have some incredible guests, some incredible speakers. Last time we hit a certain number of people in the room, and we want to double that and make sure that we're continuing to provide great content so people can be aware of what's going on in the political realm with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm really excited for our next one. It's sort of this, unofficial grassroots movement I think we're creating of just making sure that the message that gets put out there is bipartisan Bitcoin. Don't allow this to get, divided like everything else does in this country, which is sad. I think that Bitcoin is the one thing that can unify us, which is really exciting. What do we actually agree on in this country anymore? It'd be great if it could be something like Bitcoin. As for the other, the other cryptocurrencies, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, because in my personal belief, and one of the reasons why I tend to be more of a maxi is I don't see a lot of the other cryptocurrencies as money or property. I see them as technology companies or, tokens and different projects, and some of them are securities. And so I wonder how that will impact regulation, because right now everything's getting bunched together, right? Crypto equals Bitcoin equals everything. And that's really not the case. And I think that, property rights is something inherently so fundamental to American rights. And I love the idea that Bitcoin is digital property. It's 21 million plots of land in cyberspace, and we need to protect property rights. And so I'm curious to see how regulation and the regulatory framework will actually come to address some of these differences in the currencies and in the technologies, because right now everything kind of is lumped together.
Here's a good question. There may be a lot of people who understand what's happening with Bitcoin, or like what is Bitcoin, right? Why it exists, the economics behind it, the history of its founder, and the growth of it since its launch. But they may not know a lot about how it's regulated, what the laws surrounding it are, what's upcoming. Like, where can they find this information? Because I think that's probably the gap that people may just have, that where they buy Bitcoin, they're like, oh, okay, I have this, I put it in my hardware wallet, I'm gonna keep it in a cold storage and not do anything with it. But there's this looming threat from potential law, or from lawmakers, that of potentially bad laws or bad regulations which could affect them. So how can they get educated on these really important issues and become more political about owning Bitcoin and preserving it as a single issue voter?
I think we're at the very beginning stages of the Bitcoin political movement, and there's a lot of work being done to ensure that the average person has access to the educational tools and materials and resources that will enable them to be in touch with what's going on the ground floor with the political movement here in the USA. So I think people need to stay in tune, follow the best people on Twitter that are covering this story. Make sure you stay abreast to everything that the Bitcoin Today Coalition and Bitcoin Magazine are doing when it comes to this space, because they are both actively working. And there's others out there as well, but those are the two top ones that are working very actively to make sure that not only the public is educated, but that the members of Congress are educated as well. So stay tuned for more ways to make sure that you're staying educated on these issues. For now, I think the most important thing you can do is just make sure you follow the articles that come out from the various media sources that are close to these stories. Again, I'll reference Bitcoin Magazine there. They just covered the Hillary Clinton comments. I think they did a great job of covering I think it was Alex McShane who covered that with that article. But also, follow, people like me and Natalie who are constantly on the ground floor trying to find ways to make sure that people stay educated. There's also a Telegram room that we have that we can share in the notes that allows the average person, the average pleb or Bitcoiner, to join and stay educated on what's going on and really stay in touch. And we can share that link with you, or if you come to the Bipartisan Bitcoin event, what are we launching? Are we officially announcing the date? I think it's December 8th that we're going to be doing that. So if you're interested in being a part of that, make sure you stay tuned for when we're allowed to schedule that spaces. And we'll be sharing a lot more details on how people can stay educated.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as a former reporter, I'm a big believer in going straight to the source. So, if you are in Bitcoin and you haven't read the white paper, it's kind of like, where have you been? And so if something's coming out, if there's a bill, if there's legislation, read it, read the actual thing, because they stick some things in there you might not expect. And so I think it's just important to actually read the documentation, follow the money trail, follow the information trail, and just go straight to the source and not necessarily third parties. There are some great media outlets out there, but other ones, unfortunately just don't understand this space. So you're going to see misleading headlines, I think, as this rolls out continuously and is a topic of conversation in Washington. So big believer in that, and making sure that you are voting in politicians who have a stance on this. Ask the people who are your representatives or who are running to be your representatives, what is your stance on Bitcoin? Because I know, as you mentioned, this is going to be a single issue voting, future potentially for some people. So I think just go to the source, do your reading.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing, Sam. For us, as an organization, but also as employees and team members here, I think even for us, I think there's a lot of education required internally, and we're in the Bitcoin and we're in the crypto space, right? So it's not, it's definitely not easy to get all this information, especially real time these days. But one thing that we have done, and we're continuing to explore how to do this as Okcoin and sort of our service to our users, is we've donated to CoinCentive. We've worked with places like Blockchain Association when that was it the tax sort of bill, or they try to insert that tax language into the bill. We sent out an email imploring our users to go call their senators and take action and do something about it, right? And I think that's something for us to continue to explore, how we can present this information, not in an alarmist way, but that as users and holders of Bitcoin and crypto, we can take action. There are paths for us to either use our financial resources or our voice to make some of these laws more palatable for us. So we'll continue to explore that. And I guess a question for you guys is, as an organization and a business in the space, what do you guys suggest we should do? I know Coinbase came up with their own approach to regulations, and just curious what your thoughts are.
I'm going to brainstorm on that for a second.
Okay.
I just think it's great when you have companies like yours that's creating content as well, which I think is really important, because users are going to go straight to the platform first. I think, mainstream news is not covering this in the way that they should and the way that they need to be, and the way that I think eventually they will have to. So I think that if you have direct contact to your customers because they're checking the price or they're checking, their account every single day, potentially, I think you have direct access to make sure that they are receiving content that is thoughtfully written and that's giving them the headlines that they need to hear about this space. So I think just content, every company now is a content company at the end of the day. It's the reason why I think I was able to leave my job. I didn't have to stay in legacy news anymore. I'm now my own content creation media company. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but I'll try to think of other ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating content, being a part of the conversation, being active in the dialogue, and making sure that you are asking your local officials and engaging with them. Politics is very local at times. So, it would be impossible for me to have as much influence over your local official as you would be able to. You can go there, you can talk to them and say, listen, this directly affects my savings. It directly affects my business and my work. And this is why I believe this. That is an incredibly effective way to engage politicians who are always making a calculation in the back of their mind. How do I gain more voters? How do I gain more support? And also, how do I stop support from going to my opponent and stop money from going to my opponent. So that's one really big way that you as the average person out there or as a company can ensure that you are making sure that things in this country align with your Bitcoin position. Also, follow these organizations. Make sure that if you like what they're doing, I don't care if it's Coin Center, I don't care if it's Bitcoin Magazine or Bitcoin Today Coalition, find one that you agree with the work that they're doing and donate to that organization, because they're going to use those funds to directly lobby members of Congress and ensure that Bitcoin is protected in the USA for years to come. So those are the two biggest things I would highly encourage people to take action on.
Yeah, Dennis, I like how you bring up talking with local officials, because one thing that businesses, at least crypto businesses, can do is they can move. I'm sure there are mayors like Mayor Suarez or the mayor of Austin or Texas or Florida who would be, or even Wyoming, who would be happy to open their doors to high-paying tech jobs moving to their state and creating jobs and creating income, creating tax income for those states. And I'm sure they would love any crypto company to move out of California and to relocate down to sunny Miami, where I am, or over to Texas, or even up to Wyoming as well too. And I think you're seeing that already, where now that everybody can be work from home, there's no restrictions to be in an office, and I think that competition is just going to increase even more. When Mayor Suarez was giving his initial kind of talk, he was interviewed by Balazs Srivastava, or sorry, I screwed that up, but he said that Miami wants to be the capital of capital. It's a competitive landscape now. There's no reason for companies to stay in one place, and these mayors are going to have to compete. These states are going to have to compete. There is no more single place. And so I think a lot of these issues, they're going to start local, and then they're going to move to being national issues as well too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I also like what you said earlier about how it's a national security issue. The core thing in the Bitcoin miner is a chip. It's a small 7 nanometer chip. And right now, most of those chips are made overseas. And so one thing that could really be pushed from a political perspective is to say, look, we need more chip makers here in the United States. Every single Bitcoin machine should be handcrafted in the United States. It should run in the United States, and it should create jobs here. So I think that's there's a broader conversation about how about more than just owning, about the entire economy, about running a business, running the exchange, making the miners that can generate huge swaths of income and jobs here in the United States. And I think that's something that's going to be picked up upon by the Bitcoin community and really become a driving force for political action.
I'm actually curious if anyone's tried to quantify this, the size of that economy and the economic impact it has on the U.S. I'm just curious, like the number of jobs. You could go about in many ways, right? Just curious. Yeah, that might be a compelling argument to be made. Hey, look, there's whatever $100 billion industry here that you guys are threatening, or whatever the number is. I don't know.
Well, very well that when you look at just the way the tech industry has become the dominant force for America's strength and innovation and financial stability, I very well believe that Bitcoin and the greater space can replace that and expand upon that. I mean, 20 years ago, the top 20 companies on the Dow and the S&P 500 have changed dramatically. They're almost all on the Dow. It's almost all tech companies now, right? Whereas those companies didn't even exist 20 years ago. I think you're going to see the same thing occur. And that's why it's so important that we don't follow into this mindset of Bitcoin being some kind of a threat to the United States. Bitcoin and the innovation that's being created around it, including the mining, the businesses, the jobs that it will create, the innovation that it will create. We want all of that here in the United States so that we can have another 20 years, another 30 years of growth and innovation and job creation here in the US. So I absolutely agree that Bitcoin will be a job creator. I'd love to see the miners come here because it also incentivizes the chip manufacturing to occur here in the US, which is an incredible national security issue when you consider the amount of chip production that occurs outside of the United States. We don't want our enemies making these chips. We want to make them ourselves. And Bitcoin mining is incentivizing the chip operation manufacturing to occur here in the US. We've already seen it occurring. Blockstream is creating their own foundry to make chips here in the US and create more jobs, more innovation, and keep all of that here in the United States. And I'm, if you can't tell, very excited about the future for Bitcoin in the United States.
Yeah, I think just the economic impact is going to be incredibly huge. There's so much behind all of this, and I think one of the things is that I keep on remembering is that back in 1990, when the first tech boom happened, there was internet companies, and then there was every other company, right? There was like people that were in Silicon Valley making Google and stuff. But now we're in 2020 and every company is an internet company. So I just kind of think that in 20, 30 years, we're not going to think about, oh, are these companies like working with Bitcoin, or are they working with, their different cryptocurrencies? Everybody's just going to have to use them. They're just going to become a part of every single business, every single person's personal lives. And it's going to be so day-to-day, not impressive anymore, that people just aren't going to think about it. It'll just become the norm of the day. And I think that's what we have to fight for, is to not put any roadblocks in there, to allow this adoption to continue on, and make sure that, in 20 years from now, every single company is using Bitcoin.
I totally agree. I completely see the future in basically 10, 20 years, moving us into this digital age of saving. And I think a lot of things will be tokenized. I think we're going to have digital identities. I'm not, a huge fan of the metaverse stuff, but but I do think that we're moving in this direction. And when you bring up national security, what I also end up thinking about is how different the threat of national security is in the cyber age, right? So Bitcoin to me is so amazing because for the last 12 years, every single day, every single moment that it is operated, it is under attack, right? There's cyber warfare happening at all times. It is this peaceful thing that just keeps trucking along, and it has maintained its resiliency. It is strengthened year by year, day by day, block by block. And so I think that it really speaks to just the power of this technology, that it's essentially, because of its distribution around the world and its decentralization, it's essentially bomb-proof. And we're going to need to protect this ecosystem because it's all around the world now, and we all need each other, and we all benefit from it.
I love the comment that you made earlier just a moment ago about, everything was a company and then it was a tech company, and now there's going to be some sort of change. I think we're all going to be fintech companies here in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on is that we're getting closer to the end of the year, and it's important to remember, we're not tax professionals here, and you definitely should have a CPA or work with a tax provider. But one thing that can be done potentially to reduce your tax bill is to make donations to nonprofit organizations like Coin Center, like Blockchain Association, these company or nonprofit groups which are working to drive policy around Bitcoin. You can sell some of your Bitcoin, or I think they even take Bitcoin donations at these entities, where you can just send them Bitcoin. You can use it as a tax write-off. So this is something that, you can put your hard-earned profits to use, because I'm sure a lot of people are sitting on a huge amount of profits this year, maybe some long and short-term capital gains, and donating that to one of these organizations, because you may think that there is a big, broad coalition of political action groups that are out there fighting every single day. And yes, it is true, but it's a lot less people than you think. The Coin Center guys were like a team of like 3 or 4 for a long time, and they were achieving so much. And same thing for the other groups like Blockchain Association as well too. There's a core group of people who need your support, both in politically and then also financially as well too. So I would highly suggest, after consulting your tax professionals, to go out and make a donation to these groups before the end of the year, and put the money to work to making Bitcoin the number one topic here in the United States.
Hey, Dennis, you mentioned I know we have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure I get this question asked, is, politics being local, and we have so many layers of politicians that we can engage with individually and as businesses. Where is there a source for us to see, as potentially single issue voters, what do these politicians, how do they side, right? Have they taken a stance? Have they not? Is there a good source for that? I mean, I struggle to come up with one right now.
There are a few organizations and individuals out there that are building lists. These are really important for voters. One of the main ways that I became aware of the power of a single issue voter was when I used to work in politics. I became very disenfranchised by this idea of working through a party. They're very slow and monotonous. I remember one time on a party convention floor, they were debating the meaning of a word for like 5 hours. And I just wanted to just crawl into a ball and leave that place. It was a horrible experience. Made me never want to do party politics again. Eventually, I came across this idea of single issue voters. And ultimately, one of the powerful things about single issue voters is that you're not beholden to a party, and you are allowed to use a lot of other tools to kind of help encourage your base and your voters to move a certain direction. And one of the tools that these groups often use is a voter score sheet. And so what many people are doing right now is they're building voter score sheets for these elected officials and for candidates that are running. There are a couple that are being worked on. One is being worked on by Jameson Lopp, and I know there's another one. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head right now, but they're not fully complete. So I wouldn't really even send you them as a way to kind of influence how you vote currently. But we do know there are certain people out there that are definitely very much on our side, and they deserve your support and they deserve your donations. You have Senator Lummis, you have Ted Cruz, you also have Warren Davidson, and we have candidates like Erica Rhodes, who are running against the most anti-Bitcoin congressperson in office today, Brad Sherman, who is so radical. He doesn't just want to over-regulate Bitcoin. He wants to ban it. I mean, it's an extreme viewpoint, and I can't wait to see him removed by her as a candidate. But yeah, there's a lot of ways for the average voter to be aware of how someone stands. But again, this is such a new issue. It's so brand new. We don't know how these politicians think. Oftentimes, if you try to call and get them to make a statement on the record, they're like, I don't even know what Bitcoin is. Like, I just found out about this thing because you guys all went up in arms when we started trying to write legislation about it. So again, I think stay tuned, be patient, and eventually there will be tons of resources and materials coming from these organizations and from people that are reporting on this issue.
Dennis, maybe we need to create a website like probitcoin.com or something where it's like if you're a candidate for office, or if you're in office, you're going to have a check mark, or you're going to have an A+ or a minus. We're going to have a report card for these politicians. How much do you know about Bitcoin? Have it go viral so we can really, stick.
I think that would be awesome. And a great resource.
Set them through like a little video class where they have to take a test and see what they know the answers to, and check with that. But there are some great people out there that are running to, like Matthew Deemer, who he understands the tech, he hodls Bitcoin, he has his own keys. There'll be varying ways where we can decide, what's good enough for my vote. First, it's going to be like, oh, are you pro Bitcoin? Yes, great, you get my vote. In the future, it's going to be like, do you hodl Bitcoin? Do you hold your own keys? How much do you understand the importance of self-custody? Do you understand the importance of peer-to-peer transactions and protecting that in the future? So I think as time goes on, where it's not going to be so much, are you pro or anti-Bitcoin? It's going to be like, what's your opinion on how we utilize this technology to advance the average person in the United States and to advance national security interests of the country? Not like, here's my example. Are you pro or anti the economy? Nobody is pro or anti the economy. They're like, this is my plan. Yeah. Or the internet. Exactly. This is my plan for the economy. This is my plan for how to protect the internet.
Yeah. I think at its core, I mean, it's important to remember that I think of Bitcoin as the purest expression of free speech through technology that we have. There's just simply no other platform that allows you to speak, because code is essentially speech. Allows you to speak in a uncensorable, immutable way, and there's nothing else like that. And I think that at its core is very highly tied with American ethos and our Constitution. And so, supporting Bitcoin for what it is and its ability to promote American values, I think is just essential. I really think that we have to get everybody fired up. We have to get them aware of these issues that, just get swept through, because I don't think people understand how laws get passed today. Most laws are already written by the time they hit the House floor or the Senate floor. There are policy groups, there are lobbying groups that write the bills for senators. Senators don't write, or representatives and senators don't write the bills anymore. This is all done in back rooms without any input, and we have to insert ourselves into that discussion at the phase at the absolute beginning, before anybody asks, to drive policy and to essentially get what we want. And that requires being political. And if you're not doing it, you're hurting yourself later on in the future.
You know what gets me excited, a bit tangential, and you mentioned the Constitution, but seeing a group of people raise $40 million towards a common cause of for fun or for whatever, for buying the Constitution, means that we can easily raise a equal amount of money for something that's actually meaningful to our holdings, right? I just looked it up. I think the NRA, famous for their lobbying efforts, didn't even raise that much the entire last year. So, crypto lobbying could be a very powerful force if we all, unite and get educated, like you said, Natalie. But there's still a lot of work to be done for sure.
Yeah, I love what you said about the American values, because that resonates with me. I mean, I've often talked about how Bitcoin to me represents this renaissance of the American dream. And you're right, it is freedom of speech, it is property rights, it's self-determination, it's freedom. It's like the embodiment of all these things that we hold near and dear. And so we want to support it, and we need to, do the work that other people understand it so that they can be just as excited as we are.
Do you remember the one thing that's super powerful, which I think that maybe you, Dennis, and Natalie could maybe drive forward, is getting politicians to sign something saying they support Bitcoin. Just put it into writing so you can put it somewhere. I remember back, and it may still exist, there's this whole thing about the Republicans that they all signed this, we're not going to raise taxes thing. There was this one guy who ran a political action committee or a political group, and he made every single Republican senator and representative sign this thing and put their name on it. And they held it over their heads for like a couple of decades that, we have this one thing that people said, we're not going to raise taxes. And it was like the law. No Republican was ever going to vote for increasing taxes. So maybe the same thing can be do for Bitcoin, where, you can get people to come out and sign a joint agreement between different lawmakers saying, look, we're pro Bitcoin. We want clear and reasonable regulations. We want to make sure the businesses can exist. We want to make sure that it's the fastest growing tech sector, or fastest growing sector in the United States. We want to bring all the jobs here. We want to have the smartest people here, and we want to promote it. And we're for it, and we're putting our name behind it, so that later on, if they do choose to go, you have their name. You can say, look, we're single issue voters. This is what you sign up for, and we're holding you to it.
Yeah, there's been efforts in the past to do things like these, and they work very effectively. I think originally when Newt Gingrich came into office, they had this like score sheet of things that you had to like agree to, and that you were going to do in order to, for their like kind of pitch or case for why they should be voted into office. And it worked very effectively. So things like that are great tools for getting members of Congress to commit to certain issues, because then, you have it in writing. You can hold them against it. And I think one of the worst things that you can be accused of as a political official is lying or being hypocritical. Voters tend to lose trust very rapidly with those sorts of individuals. So keeping them accountable is going to be one of the biggest things moving forward. And I think we're going to see an increase of that as time goes on. And I totally agree with some of the comments around the single issue voter base and the amount of money that's out there. I really don't think people understand just how much extra wealth has been created and put into the hands of these individuals who own Bitcoin and crypto. They have masses of wealth. And this is just the beginning of this industry. It's going to grow dramatically. So you're going to have massive businesses, all the infrastructure, and individuals with very large amounts of capital that can flood into the system. The corrupt system that was created, in fact, by power brokers of the past with things like Citizens United are going to be exactly why Bitcoiners are able to kind of take over and gain a foothold politically. There's no way they can stop us, because we all know in this country, the most powerful people, it comes down to the money, it comes down to the large corporations. And so we're going to be able to flex pretty dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years. We are just getting started. Our first battle, and we're already completely taking over the political discourse and dialogue in the most powerful country on the planet. There's going to be really big things to come. Very excited for the political movement here in the USA with Bitcoin single issue voters.
Yeah, and Dennis, earlier you mentioned Erica Rhodes. Erica wants to create, she said if she gets elected, when she gets elected to Congress, she wants to create a Bitcoin caucus, which sounds really, really cool. I think that would be amazing. So please support, candidates like her. She's fascinating. And I think a lot of the people that get into Bitcoin who are wanting to be politically active, they have really fascinating reasons for why it resonates with them. Or they had people who are potential voters say to them, hey, are you pro Bitcoin? And that's what happened with Erica. She said that actually young people, some as young as teenagers, were saying, are you pro Bitcoin? And she would say, I don't know at first. And she learned about it. And then she's like, yes. And they're like, okay, we're voting for you.
I mean, remember, there's probably some senators and representatives that were still around when they removed the gold standard 50 years ago in Congress, and they're still there, right? We need a new generation of politicians who understand the technology and understand what's actually happening in this sector to be swept into Congress and just take things over and implement this Bitcoin Congress that you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think you're going to see more of that occur. We're just in the beginning phases. Right now, you're having, some people who roughly understand the technology, who want to gain new voters. Like I said earlier about doing the calculation, all of these candidates are constantly doing a calculation on how to increase their voter base. And fortunately for most of them, Bitcoin is one of those issues that you can kind of add to your constituency block that doesn't really impact the other one. So some voter blocks don't mix so well, right? Like you can't be pro one issue and anti another one and expect them to stay together. I'm sure many people out there, I won't name the specific issues, can think of a few issues in their mind that would occur like this. Bitcoin is one of those unique issues that pretty much any candidate can add to their platform and not lose voters on the other side, which I think is an extremely important part of the political discourse moving forward. But I think the next wave of Bitcoin politics is going to be like hardcore maximalists and hardcore crypto people that are absolute believers, that deeply understand this technology, run for office, and are able to defend it on a debate platform and absolutely wipe their opponent on this sort of an issue. You're going to see a lot of things change pretty dramatically, pretty rapidly in this country. There's already one guy over here in Oregon, where it's my home state, Matt West, who's running. He's a developer. He deeply understands the technology. And when he speaks about Bitcoin and crypto, there's no way someone who is anti-Bitcoin or anti-crypto would ever be able to stand up to someone like that. But you're going to see more and more of that occur as time goes on, because as time goes on, you're going to have more and more Bitcoin and crypto holders.
Yeah, and as the market cap keeps on going up, the amount of money that can come in and influence politics it increases exponentially. It's important to remember that if 1/10 of 1% of the market cap of Bitcoin was donated or went towards political action committees or just getting some sort of policy implementations, that's over $1 billion. That's more money that's presidential races don't even spend $1 billion. There is so much money out there waiting or just that needs to come into this space so that it can affect change.
Right. And the important part to remember is it's a single issue. We're not here to mess with anything else. Don't worry, people out there. We just want to promote Bitcoin in the United States. That's all we want. We're not here to do anything else. We just want to ensure that our money is protected and that our ability to freely spend that money is protected as well.
All right, that's probably a great place to wrap up on. I think that I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion, Jason, Dennis, and Natalie. There was so much here that we unpacked, and I think that it's probably given us all some ideas about how we can lead into the future. And for those of you that are watching at home, it's not just about buying and holding Bitcoin. You're going to have to become active, whether you like it or not. Either the government's going to make the laws or we make the laws, and it's better if your voice is heard. So I'll leave it to you three. We can end on some final notes, and then we can wrap things up. So Jason, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, no, I'm just super excited to hear what's coming down the pipe. We all discussed some pretty amazing things that are in the works, educational efforts, voter scorecards. I think these are all going to be super helpful for users and voters, but also for organizations like ourselves to see how we can distribute that content appropriately and maybe even partake ourselves as a business. So a lot of homework to do for myself and the rest of our team here, but excited nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm just super excited as well to be part of these efforts. I hope to get more and more active and more involved. I know Dennis, I'm sure we'll be working together. I'm on a tour right now to spread the word of Bitcoin and orange pill some people. So if you know anybody that wants to hear about it, I'd love to talk to them about it. I hope to use my background as a communicator and as a media person to just spread this message and be a messenger for Bitcoin and for this revolutionary technology that I think is going to allow people to achieve generational wealth and achieve the American dream. And I'm just so excited about it. So.
Yeah, we've been excited to have you in this industry. Natalie, we are going to be seeing more and more extremely talented individuals like yourself join the space. So we're only going to be growing in strength, growing in numbers, growing in skills. So if you're somebody that has a specific skill out there and you are pro Bitcoin, you hold Bitcoin, you want to make sure that the United States is a part of the future and not a part of the past, and ensure that Bitcoin is protected here, make sure you use your skills. That's the political calculation that I made. I understand that I can take my Bitcoin and I could flee the United States, worst case scenario, right? It's always great to understand that I have that backup plan. But I made the calculation that I don't want to have to use that plan. I don't want to have to go down that route. I want to make sure that I can be in the United States for generations to come with my family instead of having to move my business, move my home, move my family. So I made the calculation that I'm going to fight back. And I'm super excited to see that so many other great Bitcoiners have made that decision as well. And I think it's just going to be a growing and growing movement. Right now is a great time to get in at the base floor of this political movement. If maybe you feel like you missed Bitcoin, which I still think is going way higher than it is today, but this political movement really is just getting started. Get in contact with the people that you know that are close to this subject and start trying to find ways to become a part of this movement.
Yeah, and we're going to list everything in the show notes. So check out Coin Center. They're doing great stuff. Check out the Blockchain Association. Dennis, what was the name of the organization?
So the Bitcoin Today Coalition, which is being ran by some great people that helped Orange Pill Ted Cruz and have done incredible efforts to help lobby with those in Congress directly. So they're very direct, focused on winning and getting things done. You also have the Bitcoin Magazine organization, which is just being formed and is being ran by two really, really brilliant political minds that are working actively to ensure the same thing, that Bitcoin is protected here, that we're lobbying members of Congress, that we're building these relationships. And I think that those two organizations, I would choose them over any other organization in the space that's forming right now. I know Coin Center is kind of the OG in the Bitcoin space when it comes to politics, but these new two organizations are going to do some incredible work.
Well, we're going to link down below, and I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. We need more barnstorming like this. So Dennis, Natalie, and Jason, thank you so much for coming on to this episode of Bitcoin, or of not Bitcoin Live, but Okcoin Live. It is Bitcoin Live today. We're talking about the live politics of everything. I'm fired up. I hope everybody at home is fired up. Get out, call your senators, call your House of Representatives. Just put the word out there and get them on the record. Make sure they're pro Bitcoin, and if they're not, then vote them out and get somebody else in who actually cares about this stuff. So thank you so much for coming on. And we're going to have you back to talk about the results of all this lobbying efforts. So, and make sure to follow both Dennis and Natalie, because I know that you both are closely watching all of these political events. And anytime there's any, stealth legislation that's introduced, both of you, I know, are tweeting to the high heavens about all of this, calling on senators, calling on House of Representatives to stand up and fight. And it requires our viewers at home to do the same, to make those calls and to write those letters. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be in touch. We're gonna have a follow-up on this as well too. All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having us
everyone.
on.